The void of space burned with chaos. VeraPrime's orbit had become a graveyard of shattered ships and drifting wreckage. Flames flickered in the silence of the void, and fragments of broken hulls floated among the stars. For the Zorath Alliance, this was supposed to be their final stand. But then the humans came. No one in the command fleets had expected them. Few had even remembered they existed. The Alliance archives had labeled humanity as a minor race, too young, too small, and too unprepared to stand among the great civilizations. Their ships were considered primitive, their fleets small, their technology unrefined, yet here they were, emerging from hyperspace with their ragged fleet, moving with a boldness that defied logic. Admiral Saran stood rigid on his bridge, mandibles clenched as he watched the tactical screen. Small human cruisers broke formation and dived straight at the Draxar swarm. Compared to the massive bioships, they looked like fragile sparks rushing into a storm. Impossible, one officer muttered. They cannot survive a direct charge. But the humans did not break. Their ships darted in tight maneuvers, weaving around the monstrous creatures as if they had no fear. They opened fire with railguns and missile salvos, their weapons far less powerful than Zorath cannons. Still, they struck with precision, targeting the swarm's weak points, tearing at eyes, limbs, and exposed organs. The Zorath officers on Saran's bridge stared in stunned silence. They had expected the humans to be destroyed in minutes. Instead, the swarm was slowing. Commander Talan, watching from the surface, could hardly believe what he saw. His visor displayed live feeds from orbit. Human ships rammed into swarm beasts, detonating themselves in explosions of light. It was madness. No Zorath commander would ever order such tactics. Their fleets valued survival, preservation, calculation. Yet these humans fought as if survival meant nothing, as if the only purpose of their existence was to take as many enemies as possible with them. His soldiers saw it too. Their tired eyes widened with disbelief. "Commander," one soldier whispered, voice shaking. "They fight like they want to die." Talon shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "They fight like they refuse to lose." High above, the humans' arrival had forced the swarm to adjust. The Draxar were creatures of instinct and endless hunger, but they were not mindless. They sensed danger in this new opponent, not because of their weapons, but because of their will. The humans fought with chaos. Their ships did not move in careful patterns like the Alliance fleets. They scattered, regrouped, struck from behind, and feigned retreats only to counterattack with sudden fury. One Zorath officer turned to Admiral Saran, voice filled with disbelief. "They fight without fear, Admiral. No hesitation, no caution." Saran narrowed his eyes, antennae twitching. "No," he said slowly. "They fight with something more dangerous than fearlessness. They fight with desperation." The first ground landings came an hour later. Dropships pierced through the burning skies of VeraPrime, streaks of fire trailing behind them. The Zorath troops below prepared to see the fragile human craft destroyed in midair. Yet somehow the dropships made it through the chaos, weaving between enemy assaults and crash landing in flames across the trenches. Hatches blew open. Human soldiers stormed out. They were smaller than the towering Zorath, less armored, their weapons simple ballistic rifles instead of plasma rifles, and yet they moved with a fierce raw energy. They shouted to each other in short, harsh words. Charging forward with reckless speed, Zorath soldiers, battered and exhausted, stared in shock as humans sprinted straight into enemy fire, diving behind cover, then leaping out to unleash volleys of gunfire. One Zorath private whispered, "They are mad." But then he saw what happened when the swarm struck back. A group of Draxar beasts, larger than tanks, surged through the defenses. The Zorath troops began to fall back, instinctively seeking safety. But the humans ran forward instead. They planted explosives on the beasts' legs, threw grenades under their armored bellies, and clung to their sides even as claws raked across their armor. The Zorath soldiers could not believe it. When the smoke cleared, the beast lay dead, and the humans, bloodied and battered, rose again, still fighting, for the first time in months. The swarm had been stopped in its tracks. Commander Talon approached one of the human squads after the skirmish. Their leader, a scarred man with piercing eyes, saluted casually, his face streaked with ash. "You're Zorath?" the human asked. Talon nodded. "And you are human," the man smirked faintly. "That's right. Don't worry. We've been fighting monsters our whole history. Yours are bigger, but they bleed the same. Talon studied him carefully. He did not understand humans, not yet. They looked fragile, their bodies thin compared to armored Zorath frames. Their weapons seemed weak, yet the fire in their eyes was unlike anything he had ever seen. "Why did you come?" Talon asked quietly. "Your world is far from this war. The swarm has not touched you," the human soldier shrugged. "Because if they take you, they'll come for us eventually. And when that happens, I'd rather meet them here, on your soil, than wait for them to land on mine." Talon felt a strange sensation then, something he had not felt since the war began. Hope. As hours passed, more human troops landed. They fought beside Zorath soldiers, and everywhere they went, the tide shifted. The Zorath fought with precision, holding formations and maintaining steady fire. The humans fought like wildfire, unpredictable, explosive, impossible to control. At first, the Zorath did not know how to fight alongside such chaos. But then something remarkable happened. They began to adapt. When humans charged recklessly into the swarm, the Zorath covered them with suppressive fire. When humans scattered into small squads, the Zorath formed strong anchors, giving them ground to return to. Slowly, the two armies began to blend, their different styles complementing one another. The battlefield was still a nightmare, but for the first time the swarm was not advancing. In orbit, the story was the same. Human ships hurled themselves into danger with insane courage. They rammed into swarm beasts, overloaded reactors, and detonated themselves in suicidal bursts of fire. At first, Saren had been horrified, but then he noticed something. The humans never wasted their deaths. Each sacrifice destroyed a key target, opened a hole in the enemy line, or bought precious seconds for the Alliance fleet. One of his officers turned to him. "Admiral, should we order them to withdraw? They will lose everything." Saran's mandibles clicked as he thought. Then he shook his head. "No, do you not see? This is how they fight, and we must fight with them." As the battle stretched into night, rumors spread across the trenches. Soldiers whispered to each other of the new arrivals. They are humans. They do not fear the swarm. They fight like death does not matter. For the first time in months, Zorath soldiers laughed around campfires, their voices hoarse but filled with something new. They were no longer alone. Commander Talon walked the trenches, watching his soldiers tend to their weapons. He heard them speaking quietly, telling each other stories of human bravery they had witnessed that day. They fought in small groups, surrounded, but they did not run. One of them climbed a beast back and stabbed it with only a knife. They shout when they fight. I do not know what they say, but it is like thunder. Talon allowed himself a rare smile. The swarm was still vast, still endless, and the war was far from over. But now, for the first time, he could imagine victory. The humans had changed everything. Up in orbit, Admiral Saran stood at the command deck's window, staring at the wreckage of the day's battle. The swarm had been slowed, something no fleet had managed in months. His mind turned over the truth he could no longer deny. This primitive race, dismissed and forgotten, had arrived when all hope seemed lost. And they had done what the mighty Zorath Alliance had failed to do. They had made the swarm hesitate. Saran spoke softly to himself, his words echoing across the silent bridge. Perhaps these humans are the weapon we never knew we needed. And so the galaxy began to whisper of them, a fragile race from the edge of known space, who had stood in the face of annihilation and refused to fall. The humans had arrived on the battlefield, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the humans arrived were unlike anything the Zorath soldiers had ever known. For months, every sunrise had meant another retreat, another desperate defense, another line broken. But now, for the first time, the swarm had not advanced. The humans were small in number, but their presence changed everything. Commander Talon stood at the edge of the northern trenches, his eyes scanning the battlefield through cracked binoculars. Smoke rose from the horizon, black pillars twisting into the sky. Draxar corpses littered the ground, massive beasts with armor cracked open, smaller creatures burned into ash. Among them, human soldiers worked quickly, planting charges and reinforcing weak points. Talon lowered the binoculars. His second-in-command, a tall officer named Rival, approached. "They are different," Rival said quietly. "I have never seen soldiers fight like this. They rush forward without fear. It is reckless." "Reckless," Talon agreed. "And yet somehow it works." Both officers watched as a group of humans sprinted across open ground, ducking and weaving under enemy fire. One carried a wounded comrade over his shoulders. The others fired short bursts of their rifles, pushing back the advancing swarm. They moved like they had done this all their lives. "They do not retreat," Rival said. Talon nodded. "No, not even when they should." On the front lines, the difference between the two armies became clear. Zorath troops had always been trained for precision and survival. They fired from cover, calculated every move, and withdrew when overwhelmed. It was the way of the Alliance. Fight smart, preserve strength, avoid waste. But the humans fought with raw instinct. They used cover when it helped, but abandoned it when it slowed them down. They carried knives and used them without hesitation. They charged forward even when outnumbered, shouting to each other in harsh, loud voices that echoed across the battlefield. At first, Zorath soldiers had thought the humans mad. But slowly, something began to change inside them. When humans refused to retreat, the Zorath beside them also refused. When humans shouted their strange war cries, Zorath soldiers found themselves roaring back in their own tongue. Where once the swarm had broken their spirits, now the humans lit a fire inside them. Admiral Saran saw it in orbit as well. The human ships, though fragile, darted like predators around the great swarm beasts. They sacrificed ships without hesitation, but always with purpose. One human destroyer would ram into a swarm carrier, tearing open its belly. Another would circle behind and launch missiles into the exposed wound. The swarm bled under these attacks in ways Saran had never seen before. The Zorath fleet began to copy them. Instead of standing in rigid formations, they moved with flexibility. Instead of focusing only on survival, they risked bold maneuvers. For the first time, Saran saw the swarm hesitate. And in that hesitation, he saw opportunity. On the ground, the battle for ViewerPrime raged on. A swarm offensive hit the southern line with overwhelming force. Draxar beasts, each the size of buildings, tore through walls with their claws. Smaller swarms poured into the trenches like rivers of death. Zorath defenders fired until their weapons overheated, but the pressure was too great. The line began to buckle. Talon rushed there with his unit, arriving just as the defenses collapsed. He expected to find humans pulling back like any other force would. Instead, he found them running forward. A squad of humans had thrown themselves into the heart of the swarm, guns blazing. Their commander, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, shouted orders. Her soldiers planted explosives on the beasts' legs, climbed their backs with grappling hooks, and fired into weak spots at point-blank range. The swarm faltered. Talon and his troops joined in, firing with renewed strength. For the first time, the Zorath were not the ones holding the humans together. It was the other way around. When the smoke cleared, the southern line still stood. Barely, but it stood. That night, under the dim glow of burning wreckage, Talon sat with the human commander who had led the charge. Her name was Captain Arden. "You could have retreated," Talon said, his voice heavy with confusion. "You should have retreated." Arden shook her head. She wiped ash from her face and took a long drink from her canteen before answering. "That's not how we fight. If we give ground, the enemy takes more. If we hold, maybe we buy one more minute. And one more minute can mean survival." Talon studied her. Her body was smaller than his, less armored, more fragile. Yet the way she spoke, the way her soldiers followed her without hesitation, showed a strength that could not be measured in size. "You inspire them," he admitted. "My soldiers. They look at you and they believe they can win." Arden gave a tired smile. "That's because they can." The next days proved her words true. Battle after battle, humans and Zorath fought side by side. Slowly, the Zorath learned to fight like their new allies. They became bolder, more unpredictable. They attacked with sudden strikes instead of only holding the line. In return, the humans began to lean on the Zorath's discipline. They found security in their steady formations, their precise fire. Together, they became something neither had been alone, and the swarm began to lose ground. On the 7th day since the humans' arrival, Admiral Saran gave an order he had never dared before. "Counterattack," he said firmly. The fleet, once broken and scattered, surged forward. Human ships led the charge, darting between swarm beasts. Zorath cruisers followed, striking in coordinated blasts. For the first time in months, the swarm retreated, pulled back by its own instincts. Cheers erupted across the Alliance fleet. For so long, victory had been a word forgotten. Now it was alive again. On the surface, Talon's soldiers launched a bold offensive into the ruined outskirts of ViewerPrime's capital city. Humans led the charge, storming through broken streets, rifles cracking in the night. Zorath troops covered their flanks, pressing forward with precision. The swarm fought back fiercely, but the defenders no longer bent under the weight. Instead, they pushed forward step by step, block by block. By nightfall, the city ruins were theirs again. That evening, Talon stood atop a shattered wall, looking out at the battlefield. Fire still burned, and the ground was covered with the wreckage of war. But for the first time, he saw something different. The swarm was retreating. He felt Raval step up beside him. The officer's face, once always grim, now carried a faint smile. "We did not break," Raval said quietly. "No," Talon agreed. His eyes drifted to the human soldiers, resting and laughing despite their wounds. "We learned how not to." Admiral Saran, far above in orbit, watched the swarms retreat on his tactical screen. He thought of all the battles lost before this day, all the soldiers buried in silence, and then he thought of the humans, fragile, reckless, underestimated humans, who had come when all hope seemed lost. He whispered a single word. Remarkable. The Zorath Alliance had thought themselves doomed. They had thought no strength could stand against the endless tide of the swarm. But now, on the blood-soaked soil of VeraPrime, they had seen the truth. The humans had shown them a new way to fight, and the war had turned. The battle for VeraPrime had entered a new phase. The Draxar swarm, once an unstoppable tide, now faltered under the combined might of the Zorath and the humans. But the enemy was not finished. They had learned to fear the humans. On the northern front, Commander Talon observed the swarm reorganizing. Draxar beasts, larger than buildings, marched in tight formations, their carapaces glinting under the fires of war. Smaller creatures scurried along, swarming the trenches in waves. The humans, however, did not flinch. They ran into the chaos with their rifles and explosives, shouting in their strange language. Their movements wild but precise. One of the human squads charged straight into a narrow canyon where the swarm had concentrated. Zorath troops expected them to be wiped out immediately, yet the humans disappeared into the smoke and fire, and minutes later, they emerged dragging several Draxar corpses behind them, alive and victorious. Talon could hardly believe it. They survived, a young Zorath private whispered. "They fight like they cannot die," Talon said, though he knew the truth was different. The humans were mortal, they could die, but they refused to be defeated. Captain Arden, the human commander, ran alongside her squad through the ruined city streets. She barked orders quickly, efficiently, yet calmly. Explosions rocked the ground around her, and debris rained down from destroyed buildings. Her soldiers followed her fearlessly. "Move forward," she shouted, diving behind a half-collapsed wall. She grabbed a wounded soldier, dragging him to cover. "Keep moving. Every second counts." Her voice carried across the battlefield. Zorath soldiers nearby felt a strange rush of courage. They had been fighting cautiously for months, but now, with humans leading the charge, they felt boldness they had not known existed. The Draxar did not relent. They threw everything into the attack. Massive beasts charged through streets, tendrils tearing through walls, and smaller creatures swarmed endlessly. It seemed as though the humans' fearless tactics might finally meet their match. Yet in the darkest moments, the humans shined brightest. One squad of human soldiers became surrounded in an alley. Every exit blocked, Draxar creatures pressing in from all sides. To the Zorath watching, their fate seemed certain. But the humans did not panic. They planted charges on the creatures, fired with precision, and ran through smoke and rubble, emerging victorious with not a single life lost. For the first time, some Zorath soldiers realized the humans were not fighting just to survive. They were fighting to win. Commander Talon gathered his officers in the makeshift command post that evening. Maps and holograms flickered in the smoky room, showing enemy movements and destroyed positions. "The humans are changing everything," Reval said, still in disbelief. "Without them, we would have lost the northern front hours ago." Talon nodded. "Not just the northern front. They are showing us how to fight differently, boldly, without fear." Another officer spoke up. "But they are small in number. The swarm will adapt. We cannot rely on them forever." Talon's eyes narrowed. "We do not rely on them alone, but we follow their example. And we fight with everything we have left. Tonight we push forward. As darkness fell, fires from destroyed buildings cast flickering light across the battlefield. The humans moved through the ruins like shadows of fire, darting from one position to another. Their rifles cracked against the enemy, explosives detonated in controlled bursts, and small squads ambushed Draxar beasts that seemed impossible to stop. Talon watched, inspired. He ordered his troops to advance in coordination with the humans. Where before Zorath soldiers had held their lines, now they moved forward, striking with renewed energy. The battlefield was chaotic, almost overwhelming, but for the first time, chaos worked in their favor. In orbit, Admiral Saran observed the same pattern. Human ships darted around swarm vessels, striking weak points and evading attacks with seemingly impossible speed. Zorath cruisers, once rigid in formation, began to mirror these tactics, attacking from multiple angles and forcing the swarm to defend on all fronts. Saran felt a rare sense of hope. The humans, so underestimated, had given the fleet the one thing it needed most: unpredictability. "They are teaching us," Saran murmured, almost to himself. "They are teaching us how to win." Back on the ground, the battle reached its fiercest point. The Draxar brought in their largest beasts yet, creatures that towered over buildings and carried armor almost impervious to conventional weapons. Zorath artillery struck again and again, but the creatures barely slowed. Humans, however, did not hesitate. Small squads approached the beast from unexpected angles. They placed explosives in hidden joints, aimed for eyes and weak spots, and climbed onto the beasts with grappling hooks. Where Zorath soldiers might have hesitated, humans charged without fear. When the first massive beast fell, the battlefield erupted in cheers, not because the fight was over, but because hope had returned. The humans continued to inspire. Their actions ignited courage among every alien race present. Even soldiers who had been on the brink of surrender fought with renewed determination. Zorath soldiers shouted orders with more confidence, coordinated attacks with humans, and began taking the fight directly to the swarm. Talon walked through the trenches, seeing soldiers who had cowered just days ago now running forward, rifles blazing. Humans ran alongside them, guiding them, teaching them, showing them the power of courage. As the night wore on, the battle seemed endless. Explosions lit the horizon. The screams of the swarm echoed, and fires burned across the ruined cityscape. Yet still, the combined forces pressed forward. Captain Arden, exhausted but resolute, led another charge through a narrow street. She ducked under falling debris, firing rapidly at a Draxar horde. Her squad followed, each soldier inspired by her fearlessness. Even the wounded continued to fight, dragging themselves forward to take part in the attack. Talon, watching from a nearby rooftop, felt a profound respect. These humans were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were survivors, fearless, cunning, and relentless. "They do not fight for glory," he whispered to Raval. "They fight because they refuse to lose, and that is stronger than any weapon we have." By dawn, the battle lines had shifted dramatically. The Draxar, for the first time in months, were retreating in multiple areas. The humans, though battered and exhausted, pressed the attack, refusing to let the enemy recover. Talon stood among his troops, looking over the battlefield. Fires still raged, and the air was thick with smoke and ash, but the tide had clearly turned. The Zorath soldiers, once demoralized and broken, now held their heads high. They had learned to fight alongside humans, to adopt new tactics, and most importantly, to believe that victory was possible. Even the Draxar seemed to hesitate now, sensing a new force on the battlefield that they could not easily destroy. In orbit, Saran allowed himself a small smile. The humans had not only survived, they had inspired an entire alliance to fight differently. They had turned despair into courage, chaos into strategy, and hopelessness into determination. "They are fire in the darkness," he said softly, "watching human ships weave through enemy lines, and we follow their light." Back on VeraPrime, Commander Talon walked among the soldiers, seeing them tend to their weapons and help the wounded. He saw humans doing the same, moving quickly, efficiently, and fearlessly. He understood now why the swarm had faltered. It was not just their weapons or technology, it was their spirit. The humans fought with a power no algorithm could predict, no strategy could contain. They were unpredictable, daring, and unstoppable in their determination, and in that determination lay hope. That night, as the fires burned and soldiers rested briefly, Talon looked up at the sky. Human ships darted across the horizon, small specks of light in the darkness. He knew this was only the beginning. The Draxar would return stronger and more dangerous, but for the first time he believed that the Alliance could meet them head-on. Captain Arden approached him, her face smeared with soot and ash, but her eyes bright. "You have a strong army here," she said. "But strength alone does not win battles. Courage does. And your soldiers. They have it now," Talon nodded. "Thanks to you. Thanks to all of you," she smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." The battle for Vera Prime had changed. No longer were the humans merely arriving to assist. They had become the heart of the fight. Where once despair had reigned, courage now burned like fire in the darkness. The Zorath soldiers knew one thing clearly. With the humans fighting alongside them, defeat was no longer certain. The war was far from over, but for the first time, hope had returned to the galaxy. The battlefield of Vera Prime was quiet at last, but the silence was heavy with the echoes of war. Fires still burned across shattered cities, smoke twisting toward the sky. The ground was scarred, cratered with the marks of battles fought by countless soldiers. But this time the Alliance had not lost. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the Draxar swarm had retreated. Commander Talon walked through the ruins of the city, his armor dented, his body tired, but his heart lightened by a feeling he had not known for months. Hope. Zorath soldiers were moving among the ruins, tending to the wounded, helping civilians, and taking stock of what remained. Beside him, Captain Arden of the humans walked with her squad, their rifles slung over shoulders, eyes scanning the horizon. Despite their exhaustion, they moved with confidence, their courage unbroken. They had come to a distant world far from their home, and changed the course of a war that had seemed hopeless. "Look at them," Talon said quietly, pointing to a group of Zorath soldiers helping a family trapped under debris. "They are different now," Arden nodded. "The humans do not fight alone," she said, "but they remind others how to fight. That is the strongest weapon we have." Across the battlefield, survivors of the swarm's attacks were regrouping. Many Draxar creatures lay dead, but even more had fled into the darkness of space. The swarm would not give up easily. They were endless, hungry, relentless. Yet for the first time, the galaxy had seen that they could be stopped. It was a lesson taught not by the largest fleets or the most advanced technology, but by a species many had dismissed, humans. Talon could hardly believe it. The humans had arrived as a minor, almost unknown species. Their ships were small, their weapons basic, their numbers limited. Yet they fought with a courage and determination that no alien army had ever seen. "They are extraordinary," Talon whispered, almost to himself. Arden smiled faintly, brushing ash from her face. "They fight because they have to, because they refuse to accept defeat." Talon nodded. He understood now that the humans had changed not just the battle, but the soldiers around them. In the following days, the Zorath Alliance began repairing defenses and rebuilding what had been destroyed. Humans worked side by side with alien engineers and soldiers, helping wherever they could. They shared their knowledge, their strategies, and most importantly, their spirit. Stories spread quickly among the soldiers, tales of small human squads taking on impossible odds, of a single human climbing atop a massive Draxar beast to strike its weak point, of humans standing their ground when all hope seemed lost. "They do not fear death," one Zorath private said quietly. "They fight with something. More. More than strength," another replied. "More than skill. They fight with heart." Commander Talon visited one of the ruined districts where civilians were emerging from shelters. Children ran toward the soldiers, laughing despite the destruction. Families hugged one another, grateful to be alive. Humans were helping with the rescue, carrying supplies, lifting debris, and comforting the frightened. A small boy tugged at Talon's armor, his eyes wide. "Are they humans?" he asked. "Yes," Talon said softly. "And they saved us." The boy's eyes shone. "I want to be brave like them." Talon knelt beside him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can be," he said. "Bravery is not about size or strength. It is about refusing to give up no matter what." The boy nodded solemnly, understanding something far beyond his years. In orbit, Admiral Saran watched as the human fleet prepared to leave Vera Prime. Their ships were battered and scarred, some barely holding together after weeks of relentless fighting, yet the humans moved with the same fearless energy, ready to face the next challenge wherever it might come. They will return if we need them, Saran said to his officers. And if the swarm comes again, we will be ready because of them. One officer asked quietly, Admiral, how can such a small force make such a difference? Saran's eyes narrowed as he looked at the stars. It is not their numbers. It is their will. That is what the galaxy has never seen before, and it is what will save us. On the planet's surface, Commander Talon and Captain Arden walked together through the rebuilt sections of the city. The wounded were being treated, civilians returned to safety, and the Zorath soldiers moved with pride. Your people are remarkable, Talon said. They inspire courage where there was none. Arden shook her head. We did not do it alone. Your soldiers learned to fight, to believe. That is why we succeeded. Talon smiled faintly. Still, the humans changed everything. They reminded us that fear can be faced, that hope can survive even in the darkest hour. Arden nodded. That is what we do. That is why we fight. The Draxar were not gone. They would return as they always did, hungry and endless. But now the galaxy had learned something new. A single species, small but determined, could turn despair into hope. They had arrived when all seemed lost and refused to bow to the endless tide of destruction. The Alliance began to rebuild its strategies, inspired by the humans' courage. They trained their soldiers in bold tactics and improvisation, in fighting without fear. They no longer relied only on numbers and technology. They fought with willpower, bravery, and relentless determination. Human tactics became legendary across the Alliance. Small squads could take on large numbers. Improvisation became a key strategy. And courage was taught as much as any weapon could be. In the coming months, stories of the humans' deeds spread beyond Vera Prime. Across the stars, alien races whispered of the small, fearless species from the edge of known space. Tales told of their reckless bravery, their cunning strategies, and their refusal to die. They fight like nothing else we have ever seen, Zorath veteran said. They do not fear death, they do not fear the swarm. They only fight for life and hope. Children across the Alliance dreamed of being humans. Scholars studied their tactics. Soldiers carried lessons from the battlefield in their hearts. Humanity had left a mark not with power or wealth, but with courage and spirit. Commander Talon stood one evening on a hill overlooking Vera Prime. Fires still burned faintly in the distance, but the city was alive again. Civilians moved through the streets, soldiers patrolled, and humans worked with them to restore what had been lost. He turned to Arden. We faced total annihilation, he said softly. And yet, we are here, alive, thanks to your people. Arden smiled faintly, her face streaked with soot and ash. You could have done it alone, she said. But together we achieved something greater. That is what makes us strong, Talon nodded. The galaxy will not forget this day. The humans, they will become a legend, Arden's eyes shone. Not just a legend, a lesson. Hope can be found even in darkness. And courage. Courage can change everything. Years later, historians of the Alliance would write about Vera Prime and the day humanity appeared on the battlefield. They would tell of the countless lives saved, the battles turned, and the courage that inspired an entire galaxy. Children would learn of the humans who arrived from a distant world, small in number but mighty in spirit. Soldiers would train in their tactics, and leaders would study their determination. Across the stars, the name human became a symbol of hope, bravery, and the impossible made real. Commander Talon, older now, looked up at the stars one night. Memories of the battle were still vivid. The fear, the despair, the fire of the humans charging forward. He remembered the smoke, the roar, the courage, and the hope that had been reignited. He whispered to himself, a smile touching his face. We faced total annihilation, until humans appeared on the battlefield, and the galaxy, forever changed, remembered. The sky above Earth was filled with broken light. Where once the stars shone with calm beauty, now burning wreckage drifted, glowing embers of shattered ships floating like dying fireflies. The silence of space was heavy, but every surviving pilot knew the truth. Humanity had lost. The Valar, an empire of ruthless efficiency and cold calculation, had swept through human defenses like a tidal wave. Their ships were massive, shaped like jagged blades, and they fought with no hesitation. For years humanity had resisted, believing their courage and creativity could outmatch raw power. But the enemy was endless, their fleets countless, their weapons beyond anything humanity had built. On the ruins of Earth's orbit, Captain Rena Ortiz's carrier burned. Once, the vessel Unity's flame had carried thousands of soldiers, engineers, and civilians. Now it was nothing more than twisted metal, leaking atmosphere into the void. Rena sat in a lifeboat drifting away from the wreck, staring at the destruction. Her chest ached with grief, but her jaw was tight. She would not let despair break her spirit. From the lifeboat's window she could see Earth below. Blue oceans, green forests, and shining cities all scarred by fire. The Valar had not destroyed the planet. They preferred conquest over annihilation. Their soldiers now occupied the surface, enforcing obedience. Humanity was not exterminated. Humanity was enslaved. The thought made Rena's heart burn hotter than the flames in orbit. The silence of defeat across the colonies, silence followed. Mars, once a thriving hub of miners and engineers, now sent no signals. The moons of Jupiter, where scientists had built great research outposts, had gone dark. The Valar had silenced them all, cutting off every beacon, every proud sign of humanity's progress. To the galaxy, it seemed as if humanity had been erased. The Valar did not bother broadcasting their victory. They believed it spoke for itself. Humanity was shattered, broken into fragments, but deep in the shadows, small sparks still glowed. Hidden outposts on asteroids, families who refused to kneel, soldiers who refused to surrender. The enemy thought humanity had fallen completely. They did not see the quiet eyes still watching them, waiting for the right moment. Rena's escape, Rena's lifeboat drifted for hours before it was picked up by another vessel, a smuggler's ship called the Silver Wind. Its captain, an older man named Elias Kane, had once traded goods between Earth and the colonies. Now he traded survival. When he pulled Rena aboard, his tired eyes widened. "You were on the Unity's flame, weren't you?" he asked. Rena nodded. Her voice was hoarse. "I was," Elias sighed. "Then you've seen it all. The last of the fleet, gone." Rena swallowed the pain rising in her throat. "Not all," she said firmly. "If I'm still here, it means humanity still has something left." Elias looked at her for a long time, then gave a small smile. "Spoken like a soldier. But the truth is, Captain, the war's over. The Valar won." Rena turned her gaze to the viewport where fragments of ships still floated in the distance. Her hands clenched into fists. "Wars don't end just because the enemy says so. They end when we stop fighting. And I don't plan to stop." The enemy's belief far from Earth, on the command bridge of a massive Valar warship, Lord Karvek observed the occupied human worlds through holographic displays. His alien features were sharp and rigid, his skin marked with glowing lines that pulsed like circuitry. "Human resistance has collapsed," his second-in-command reported. "Their fleets are destroyed. Their colonies silent. They will not rise again." Karvek's cold eyes narrowed. "They are a stubborn species. They clung to defiance longer than most, but in the end they are fragile. Fear will hold them quiet." He believed the war was finished. To him, humans were just another defeated people, destined to kneel beneath the Empire. What he did not understand was that fear in humans often turned into something far more dangerous, hope sharpened into fury. Life under occupation. On Earth, the streets of once proud cities now echoed with the heavy footsteps of Valar soldiers. Their towering frames and mechanical armor made them look like walking machines. They patrolled in silence, their glowing weapons ready. Civilians carried on with lowered heads. Factories that once built ships now forged tools for their conquerors. Farmers worked fields not for human markets, but for alien supply lines. Yet even under the shadow of occupation, quiet acts of defiance lived. A worker might sabotage a machine. A child might paint a hidden symbol of humanity's flag on a ruined wall. A scientist might copy stolen data before handing equipment over. The Valar thought these were meaningless gestures. To them, humans were cowed and harmless. But together, these small sparks of defiance kept a hidden fire alive. The hidden network Rena soon discovered that Elias was more than a smuggler. He was a messenger, carrying coded signals between hidden human enclaves. Scattered groups across the system were already reaching out to one another in secret. In a dusty cargo bay, Elias showed her an old transmitter. "The enemy thinks we're isolated," he whispered. "They think every world is cut off. But we've been talking, quietly, carefully. Rena's heart quickened. A resistance? Elias nodded slowly. Not much of one yet. Just whispers. But people are ready. They only need a spark. Rena stood tall, her shoulders squaring as if she were once again on her carrier's bridge. Then we'll give them one. A captain without a ship at night. When the silver wind floated silently among the stars, Rena found herself staring at the starscape. Her memories of the fleet haunted her. The laughter of her crew, the fire in their eyes before the final battle, the silence when their voices were gone. She felt the weight of failure pressing on her. She was a captain without a ship, a soldier without an army, yet in her heart the fire still burned. Humanity was not finished. Not yet. A distant promise on a mining outpost hidden in the asteroid belt. A group of survivors sent a coded signal. We are alive. On a ruined moon near Jupiter, engineers scavenged broken ship parts, whispering of rebuilding. On Earth itself, families passed down stories of the time before the fall, telling their children that one day, humanity would rise again. The enemy believed humanity had been silenced. But scattered across the system, a quiet promise grew stronger. We are not done. The fall that planted Fury Captain Reyna Ortiz knew the truth. Humanity had fallen. Their fleets were gone. Their worlds burned. Their pride crushed. But in the ashes of defeat, something stronger than fear was growing. A fury that would not be quenched. The Valar thought humanity had broken. But they had made a mistake. They had not destroyed humanity. They had forged it into something new, and when the time came, humanity would rise in fury.